What's up guys, Alex back again, this time with something a bit different, a contest entry. I don't enter many contests, but this is a channel I really love watching, Noble Records. He hit 750 subscribers, very well deserved 750 subscribers, so I love tuning into his channel every time he puts a new video up, because he always shows some interesting stuff. A lot of rock, I'll admit, but it's all good stuff, you know. The stuff I like seeing. He gets original 90s pressings. Probably one of my favourite videos on his channel is him going through all the first pressing Pearl Jam and Red Hot Chili Pepper stuff that he found. That video just blew my mind. But he's reached 750 subscribers, and I wanted to show my support for his channel by making a video response. So here it is. He's got 5 questions. 5 questions that he wants you to answer. So the first question is, what's your first experience with vinyl, or your earliest memory with vinyl? Let's just say for me, I grew up with vinyl all around the house. My parents had it, they still do, and I remember we had a record in our first house. We had a record player set up in the living room, and all the records underneath the record player on a shelf. And I remember being home alone after school one day. I think I was about 5 or 6, somewhere around there. But I was just at home alone one day, and I discovered the record was underneath on the shelf, and I flicked through, and there was one cover in particular that really caught my eye, and it was Queen's Greatest Hits Volume 2 on vinyl. I don't know if we still have that album on vinyl, but for me, that album, I threw it on the record player, and it just blew my mind, and the sound of it, and I don't think I'd ever experienced music like that. And that's probably why I treasure Queen a little bit, because they're one of the first bands I ever experienced on my own. Because obviously as a kid I didn't have my own records, so I had to go from my parents' record collection, and I'd listen to whatever they had. So it was Queen, it was Depeche Mode, Gary Newman, Human League, Rick Astley and Cliff Richard was basically the bulk of my parents' collection. Because my parents shared a collection. They didn't have a very big collection then, but they had a collection that I would go through and listen to, and I just remember being fascinated by the covers and the sound of this music, how it was different to whatever was being played on the radio. And so that was kind of my first memory with vinyl. And then if we fast forward to years later, obviously I'm still now discovering new music and new sounds that intrigue me just like they did back then. So I'm very glad you asked that question, because I don't think I've ever told that story on this channel, so thanks Noble Records for doing that. The second question he was asking us was, what's the first album you fell in love with? Now, I was going to have something else for this, but there is only really one answer for this, and that is Eminem Recovery. This is an album that I guess it could have been for a later question as well in this, but I decided to put it here because this album really did change my life. This album is the reason I listen to hip-hop so much. Why I love hip-hop so much, it's on this album right here, and it is just a phenomenal album. And at the time, I was just fascinated by his wordplay and the way he put rhymes together. I didn't even go back to his older work when this came out, because I was put onto this by a good friend of mine, who I'm still friends with today, thankfully. But he put me on this album, and then I was just listening to this on loop from start to finish, like every single day. Every hour of every day I was listening to this, and I think at one point I did memorize all the words. So I was very pleased to find this original press when I was collecting records for the first time. But yeah, very, very nice album. Obviously not his best, unfortunately, but it has that significant, or has a soft spot in my heart for being the first album I ever fell in love with. And then obviously as we go back through his discography, I start loving hip hop a lot more than I do. So there it is. Recovery by Eminem is the first album I fell in love with. The third question he wanted you to know is what, that he was asking us, excuse me, was what is the most you've ever spent on a record? Oof, where do I start with this? This was at a time when I was a big Stevie Wonder fan. I still am, don't get me wrong, but at this time I was just discovering Stevie Wonder, and I was fascinated by his music and wanted everything that he ever worked on. So I may have overpaid for this, and despite what I have in my collection or anything like that, this is the most I've ever paid for a record. Yes, it's a 7-inch EP mono, but I paid £70 for this, which works out to about, I don't know how many dollars that works out to, but I'm sure I'll put it on the screen anyway. But this is the most I've ever spent on a record. And obviously it's not in great shape, but again, I just wanted it. I know I overpaid for it, I know I did, but I'm not upset because at the time I didn't have any of the songs that are on this EP, so I was just happy to have it. So yeah, that is the most I've ever paid on a record. And like I said, I wanted everything by Stevie Wonder. I still do, I think, but I have pretty much most of the stuff that I've been looking for already, so I'm happy to have that. The fourth question is, what album is sentimental to you or has had the most impact on you? Obviously, like I said, sentimental album for me would also be Recovery by Eminem, because that album helped me through some tough times during my teenage years, because I was 13 when that album came out, so I was just at that point in my life when I was discovering music for myself and having those influences around me that could help me discover the new music, and that was just the peak of when that was happening. So yeah, I turned 13 and I fell in love with that album, and it just helped me through some tough times in my teenage years. But I went with something else for the most impactful album, because the first time I listened to this album, it changed my whole perspective on music. Now yes, that can mean a whole bunch of things, and what I mean by changing my whole perspective is because at the time I got this, I was into hip hop, I was into soul and funk, and that was it. Outside of Queen and all those earlier influences from my parents' record collection, I didn't know anything about classic rock before I heard this album. But when I heard Led Zeppelin's debut for the first time in 2016, yeah, 2016, which was the year I started collecting vinyl. When I heard this album for the first time, I put the needle on it, and that the intro to Good Times, Bad Times made my jaw drop. And I'm not exaggerating there, it literally made my jaw drop. And at this point, I just thought, right, where has this album been my whole life? Because my parents didn't listen to Led Zeppelin. I mean, the closest I think I got was my uncle, but even he was into into like Nat King Cole and Elton John and things, but he didn't have a record collection. But yeah, Led Zeppelin's first album was just a big impact on me, as it changed my whole perspective and actually made me respect classic rock, hard rock, blues rock, just any rock music in general, because outside of Queen I didn't really know rock music that well. So this album really had that impact on me, and it just changed my entire taste in music. And this album single-handedly is the whole reason that I venture into every genre I possibly can, because I want to make sure I explore everything that my ears have to hear. So this album is responsible for that. So that's why this is the most impactful album for me. The fifth question that we were asked from Noble Records was to say what our ultimate grail is. Now I had to think about this because there's so many things on my wants list that I know have been reissued, and I can buy the reissue at any time I like. But there's one album for me, so I really had to think about it, but then there's one album I know that was pressed up in the mid-2000s, I think about 2005, that has never been reissued, and as far as I'm aware is out of print. That album is Shiny Toy Gun's We Are Pilots. I discovered this album even before I was into vinyl, before I listened to Led Zeppelin, and it had the influences of that symphonic sound along with that sort of rocky sort of sound that I knew from, I guess, the heavy metal I was sort of listening to at the time. But it was a different sound that I enjoyed, and really wanted to discover that album, but never found it. And ever since I started buying vinyl, it's one album I've always wanted, but I've never been able to find, because I know that they're not pressing it up anymore. This album, I haven't checked in a while, but this album can easily go into the triple digits if you find it in mint condition. And I'm pretty sure that it was never pressed over here in the UK anyway. I'm pretty sure it was only ever pressed in the US. I could be wrong on that. I know I am, probably am. I'm no expert when it comes to things like that, but all I know is I want the album, and I know it's out of print. So that, for me, is my ultimate grail. It was going to be Skull Snap's album. It's a funk soul album that they put out in the 70s, and then they disappeared off the face of the earth. And like so many hip hop people have sampled that record that I just want it that bad, but they reissued it in recent years, and so I can just buy that reissue anytime I like. But with Shiny Toy Gun's album We Are Pilots, they haven't reissued that, so that's probably my ultimate grail, at least for me. Oh, excuse me. But with that out of the way, I mean, there's obviously loads of funk and soul albums I could have picked, but I think just because of the fact that that's the one I've been looking for the longest time, that's why it's on my so high on my wants list. But yeah, that is going to do it. Noble Records is 750 subs contest. Well done for hitting 750 subs. Very, very well deserved, and well, here's to many more. So once again, thank you guys so much for tuning back into the channel, and I hope to see you again very soon. Peace.